Hi, Marianne here to talk about Scripture. And today we're in March 27th in the One Year Bible. And the Scripture verses are Deuteronomy 7:1 through 8:20 and Luke chapter 7 verse 36 through chapter 8 verse 3. And today we're going to be looking at two concepts, one from the Old Testament, one from the New, that keep us from being saved or growing in our faith, in our relationship with the Lord. The first one is self-sustenance. That's the topic of the Old Testament, and self-righteousness is the one for the New Testament. So here we have in Deuteronomy, Moses is telling the children of Israel, or reminding them that they are a special people. In chapter 7, verse 6, Moses reminds them, "For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." And then after reminding them that they are this special people, he also reminds them of all that the Lord led them through during their time in the wilderness. And he tells them how important it is for them to be separate from the native people in the land, that they are not to intermarry with them, that they are not to follow after their gods, that they are to keep themselves close to the Lord. And the way they are to do that is to follow the commandments. So Moses exhorts them in chapter 8, verse 1, to keep the commandments close. He says, "All the commandments which I command thee this day shall ye observe to do, that ye may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. And he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna which thou knowest not, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. Thy raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. Thou shalt also consider in thine heart, that as a man chasteneth his son, so the Lord God chasteneth thee. Thou shalt also consider in thine heart, that as a man chasteneth his son, so the Lord thy God chasteneth thee. Therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains and depths, that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness. Thou shalt not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass. When thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day. Lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses, and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions, and drought, and there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee, to do thee good at thy latter end. So Moses is reminding them of all of the really wonderful things that the Lord brought them through and to let them know that when they have all of these things in the land that have been promised to them, that they not turn from the Lord, because if they do, their latter end will not be well, as we will see. And as Moses prophesied, they actually do fall into that pit of thinking that in their blessings that they are self-sustenance, that those things came out of their hand because they're a special people, that they have proudly claimed to come from their own power and their own might, so to speak, instead of by the hand of the Lord. So then we move into Luke, where Jesus has been invited to eat with a Pharisee, and this Pharisee, it appears to be that this Pharisee might be a believer because of the way the Lord is having conversation with him. So let's read about that. Luke chapter 7, starting in verse 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he saith, Master, say on. There was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence, and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. And they that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, Who is this that forgiveth sins also? And he said to the woman, Thy faith hath saved thee. Go in peace. So Simon the Pharisee here learns from Jesus that self-righteousness is what stands between a person and the Lord, not sin if it's repented of. So this woman who had many, many sins recognized that she was a sinner and wanted forgiveness and knew who to go to for that forgiveness. So if we look at this, things did not really change from the Old Testament to the New regarding faith. Those in the Old Testament who had faith and sought to keep the Lord's commandments and be separate from the world, and be separate from the sin of the world in particular, that they would be saved, and that they would be prosperous in the land that they were ready to go into. And same for the New Testament. We have by faith entrance into the Lord's kingdom right now spiritually, but later by the end of the tribulation, we will be going into the kingdom by faith, into that good land by the faith, the very same faith that this woman with the alabaster box of ointment had. So instead of relying on self-sustenance and self-righteousness, we come to the Lord with nothing but sin to offer him, and in turn he brings us into the promised land of the kingdom. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.